Hi, it's What If Wednesday time with Susan Bennett Fisher and Martin Fisher, the co-founders of Body of Nine. What if you could be certain about some things in life? What is certainty? And how does it play a role in our lives?
Certainty is one of the biggest paradoxes that I think we experience, because there are some things we need to be certain of, and I'm certain there are some things that we're not certain of.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those paradoxes. Because certainty can get us into trouble when we're really certain of something.
But also, if you're not certain about certain things, then you're going to use certain way too much, and that will certainly sound very certain and strange.
Uh-oh, we're really in trouble with this topic. Yeah. So we had an amazing weekend last weekend with our first certification class. And the topic of certainty came up around Body of Nine. And one of the things I realized for me is when we are not aware of where we're holding on to a powerful unconscious belief, we can come across as being very certain about something. And that certainty in that situation can keep us from being open to hearing other points of view. It can make us sound like we're the only ones that know the way. It can really get in our way in terms of communicating with other people.
And it stops us being able to learn new things, because if we're certain about something and somebody else comes up with some different information, we can't absorb that information. And if that information is, there's a tiger running right behind you, then it's going to be bad not to know about it.
Yes, or there are 9 physiologically different kinds of people. That's bad not to know too.
It's awfully bad not to know that, yes. And we're certain, sorry guys, but we are certain that there are 9 physiologically different kinds of people. And we're certain that the sun's going to rise in the east and set in the west. And there's a few other certainties in life. Gravity or something like it is keeping us down on the ground. And
But those come from our personal experiences, and they recur over and over and over again. So it's that recurrence that creates experience that creates, or learning, that creates that certainty within us. But there is, I'm not quite done yet. There is another kind of a way that certainty is actually very valuable, because when you're trying to make a decision, until you can drop into the answer for yourself, you don't necessarily know what direction to go. And so being uncertain about that direction can freeze you.
And just as there are 9 different kinds of people, there's 9 ways that people use certainty. It would seem, based on what Susan just said, that she requires some experience or some way of knowing rather than just knowing. Because there's an element of just knowing things that makes us not disbelieve, which allows us to have some certainty. And the weighing of not disbelieving and the weighing of what is certain gets a little grey, because we say don't disbelieve about a number of things that we've experienced, but there's also a number of things that we know, that are certain we know, that are just because. We are fairly certain, with no evidence, that there is a higher power.
Well, I think there is actually a lot of evidence that there's a higher power.
There'd be a lot of people out there that would argue with that statement.
Well, yes. And it's certainly not something, oh God, that I am positive exists, but there's enough evidence in my personal experience.
Oh, I know. It's not about evidence.
No.
It's not about evidence. That's the point. There is some certainties that are not about evidence. There is some certainties. If you feel cold, you have evidence that you feel cold. Knowing that you can warm things up is a hope. And so the definition of certainty is a little bit nebulous, and 9 different ways or more.
Do you think there are 9 different ways?
Oh, there's at least 9. There's probably 10. If you get 9 people in a room, you're going to get 10 answers. I can guarantee that.
Well, and again, certainty has a range of meanings as well.
Right. So from the natural number 5 point of view, which is how we got into this conversation, because natural number 7s hate certainty. The word certainty is anathema. It's not good for natural number 7s. But natural number 5s, actually, our level of certainty goes from 2 out of 10 to 99 out of 10. There's absolutely nothing that is really certain.
For you, certainty
except. The only thing that is certain for natural number 5 is that nothing is certain, hence the paradox.
Well, so certainty is almost like trustworthiness for you.
Correct.
Is that information or is that experience trustworthy? Or is that person trustworthy?
And that trustworthiness is a comparison. It's a comparison between what feels and what I'm certain of, what I know, and the level of uncertainty that I experience. If someone comes to me about something I'm very uncertain, I'm very much likely to take that information inside and increase my certainty level. And if 5 or 6 people, none of whom I know or whom I know and trust, have come in with the same information, that certainty level is going to go up, 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 and up, and up. On the other hand, if 5 people come in with 5 different answers to the same question, that certainty is going to remain very, very fluid.
Interesting. So as you're saying that, I'm realizing I don't have that certainty meter within my being. It's either yes or no.
Correct. Yes, that is definitely my experience, that the truth, your certainty, is true right now, but
it can change.
And it will change. It can change and will change in 15 minutes' time when something else becomes more alive or when new information comes in.
So at some level for 6s, certainty comes from the aliveness of the information or the energy. Isn't that interesting?
And that again is why certainty is very, I think, dependent on your natural number, the definition of certainty.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the point that 7s hate certainty. I think what they hate is the boundaries that holds around them from exploring.
Maybe. I think the reaction that we got when we were talking about certainty in our event last weekend was that just the concept of certainty is just not good because it does define boundaries that
and limit possibilities.
And limit possibilities. And limiting possibilities is bad. And I think part of my 5-ness, just speaking personally, is that my certainty can change. Just because I'm certain about something now doesn't mean that certainty won't change. And so we go back to what is the definition of certainty? And for me as a 5, it is what are the ways that I understand the world works.
And then how much is it setting off your BS detector?
Well, yes. And
it's like, okay, no setting off, lots of setting off.
Well, but the other thing is the certainty meter and the BS meter are not related. They're not connected.
They're not connected.
They're not connected. Someone can come and talk to me, and even if they believe it, if it's not in the worldview, the BS detector is going to go off, even if I'm not certain about the answer. Someone can come to me and say, well, the moon's made out of blue cheese. And, I'm pretty sure it isn't. But just the fact that they believe it doesn't make me feel certain about that truth. So the certainty and the BS meter are not connected. I don't have to be very certain to be able to for my BS detector to go off. Right.
Okay. So you don't necessarily have to know the answer one way or the other for the BS detector to indicate problems with the information.
Yes. And these prime example, something happened today where someone in our household basically said something that just my BS detector went, no, I don't think that's actually what happens. But I had no real evidence other than it didn't seem like it fit into my worldview about other things, not that particular thing. So it's not, there obviously has to be some criteria to check against, but it's not a certainty. It's more of an assumption meter.
Interesting. So let's try that 1, 2, 3, 4 on with respect to certainty.
Well, I think for 2, because...
You do 2, I'll do 1.
For 2, certainty is just in the relationship. That is all that's certain. And I think the certainty that happens in relationship for natural number 2 is just that other person. And if there's no other person there is no other entity to make the third entity, that's when the disappointment comes in because there's nothing to be certain about. Our experience, at least my experience of 2, is that there's nothing to be certain about unless it's in relationship.
I think that sounds fairly certain.
We're having fun today, guys.
So for 1, ironically, I think the certainty is in the uncertainty of source. It is in the certainty of creation. Certainty in the uncertainty. The certainty that if we just keep creating, we can keep creating. And that is the only thing that's really sort of certain to a 1, so that we can keep creating.
And I think this is where the natural number 1, sometimes the voice comes in. Because we know some natural number 1s, quite a few in fact, that given a situation, they're certain that the result is going to be the worst possible result. It happens time and time and time again. And so, and it may not be the worst possible result, but it's never a good result. And I think that's because of the constant, you're not worthy, that people keep hearing. I don't think it's a reality, but we have many, many, many occasions where the situations come up and say, well, this is going to be the worst possible outcome. And I think that there's a certainty to that, which is as a result of the not hearing, I love you.
Could be.
Not sure.
Yeah. Well, because we don't live in these other bodies. I can tell you about the 6 body, and I can tell you about how I've experienced the other natural numbers in my body. But that still doesn't make me at the superpower level of the other natural numbers.
Not at all.
So what we're telling you is with a certain lack of certainty, as we're exploring what this concept might actually be like.
And by observation.
Yes.
Because we are, as you've heard before, observers. It's how we know what we know.
And we have conversations.
Yes.
And we explore.
Yes.
So, interesting.
So 3 and 4?
3 and 4. So 3 is about focus, right? So probably the only thing that's truly certain to a 3 is that the other person has a soul and that they can see it.
And that certainty isn't necessarily conscious, but they know in their natural abilities.
Well, when the connection is made,
Yeah.
there's a certainty in that connection. It's I have a soul, you have a soul, we're here together.
And the uncertainty is, will I be able to see your soul? Will you connect with mine?
Yeah, will you show up and will you be available?
Yeah. And 4?
I think they're probably fairly certain we're never going to be authentic.
But I think they're certain that there is a deep knowing about our emotions and our ability to connect to each other at the deepest possible level.
Well, and I think they are fairly certain that we should be striving for authenticity.
Yes.
They should. They really are pretty certain about that. So our certainties are both related to our natural numbers and the gift we're offering. And I think that certainty is the thing that kind of is as part of our driver. It's like the thing that we're certain of is the thing we want to speak of, is the thing we want to share with others.
To some extent, an anchor, perhaps, what anchors us in this world.
Could be. Or just the truth, for me, the truth we know within us, the truth we know about what's important to us. That's interesting.
And then 8, we talked about 7 briefly, and 9. We had an amazing experience of 9 this weekend, and 8, so thank you for everyone that attended. And we invite you to attend others because it is really mind-blowingly life-changing every time, even when we teach them, our lives change. And that's part of the certainty of this work, honestly, is that the more...
That it will grow and change,
Yeah, we'll keep
and it'll
changing.
blow the doors off your socks,
Yes.
if you have doors under your socks.
Yeah, or socks off your doors if you have particularly cold-fitting doors.
So, certainty for 8 comes from what they feel in their body.
The 8's are certain what to say from what isn't, what they can know.
Yeah, they could be fairly certain about that.
And I think when they're not, it's when they get disassociated with their body, and they panic. All of us panic if we're disassociated from our natural purpose.
Yeah, it's a very, very important point. And that panic creates a lack of safety. And yeah.
And I think there's an element of, if you're not certain of something and you're going somewhere where you need that certainty, that's when panic comes in. I think panic is a result of disconnected from, and I know from my experience, the times when I panic the most is when my model is shown to be inaccurate or wrong, which has happened a lot in the last few days, and it's been really good growth opportunity. But it is always uncomfortable when certainty is shown to be not as certain. And I think letting the uncertainty, just like a belief, become less heavy, enables you to handle and change and flow with the changes in life, because life is not certain, no matter how much we'd like it to be.
Yeah, and I think certainty is, at some level, is a function of a deep-seated belief.
Yeah, I think
can be. I would say
Yes,
can be,
can be.
right? Because sometimes it's informationally based. I'm certain that the sun is going to rise in the east because it's done so every day of my whole life.
Right.
So,
but it's a non-zero % chance that it won't. So
that would be a bad day, though.
It would be a very bad day for all of us. But I think there's an element of historical tribal knowledge that comes into certainty. Because when we were wandering around on the plains hunting wildebeests and large elephants and all these other things, when we were hunter-gatherers, there are certain things we had to take as being true. And I think as we progress into sort of a different kind of civilization, some of those certainties are becoming less relevant, but are still impacting us. And we could go on and on about certainties that people have that other people just completely disagree with. And I think that's one of the challenges of where we are in civilization right now, is that there's a whole bunch of people that basically think one thing and are certain that's true, and a whole bunch of other people that believe the exact opposite and are equally as certain that's true. And while we hold those as certainties and not as things to be looked at, to be less certain, if we were all sides less certain and were willing to sit and listen to each other and learn from each other, I think the chances of us having a civilization that is more together.
Yeah, I'm willing to listen and converse about possibility. I know that one thing that does, that I do get mad at is when another person's certainty is very apparently wrong to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think yes.
You see that out all over the place. It's like, oh, well, how could you believe that? And how come you're so certain that that's the truth? And this is rampant right now, is our inability to actually open our minds to be a little less certain about what we know and a little more conscious of our belief systems.
Because your level of education, no matter how smart you are, does not determine how right you are. And that may be sort of the mug sticker for the day. No matter how smart you are, it doesn't make you right. And there's a lot of very smart people that disagree with each other.
So how do you manage this?
And I think the sevens give us the way. It is about being less certain. It's about being curious, open to the fact that your certainty is blinding you to other possibilities, no matter what you believe.
It's also keeping you from having deep and rich and authentic relationships with other people. If you come forward with your certainty, you're more likely to shut the other person down before you even had an opportunity to hear what they had to say.
Yeah, there's a book that I've been reading on and off for the last year or two, How to Have Impossible Conversations. And their premise is that the first thing you have to do is listen. You have to be open to listening. You cannot have a conversation with someone unless you're willing to listen where they're coming from. You may not agree with it, and in fact, you don't have to. But you do have to listen.
You have to listen. And not only that, you have to keep listening. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as we turn on our judge within our head, that's when we start to get off base.
Yeah, as soon as you start arguing.
As soon as Martin starts to say something that's wrong, if my judge says, oh, Martin is saying something that is wrong, I'm just going to fight with him. Mm-hmm. And that, in our experience, doesn't go very far, does it?
Nope. Fortunately, most of the time we manage to stop that, nip that in the bud.
Right. So, yeah, something for you to notice when you're out having a conversation with somebody and their certainty comes into play. And what does that trigger within you? And how can you combat that? So we always go back to your body can help you de-trigger. Just collapse and lift. Your body naturally recovers when it's nicely aligned, head over shoulders over hips, and you allow your natural movement center to activate. And then you can be a little less certain without being scared.
And this may be hard for you to hear, if you're certain that you're not the problem, well, guess what? You're part of the problem.
You're part of the problem. And we need so much less certainty and more openness and more curiosity these days. It's hard to know who's right and who's telling the truth. It really is.
Honestly, about most things, it doesn't matter. There's very, very, very few things in the world that one person agreeing with you or disagreeing with you is going to change the world. Unless, of course, they don't believe there's physio-spiritual kinds of people. But even so, it's your opportunity to talk to them and ask them why they believe that. Because
you might learn something.
You might learn something.
You might change your perspective. You might broaden your perspective.
And honestly, it's not about you changing their minds. It's about you understanding where they're coming from.
And you growing, and you being curious, and you transforming.
You cannot change somebody else's mind.
All you can do is change yourself.
Mm-hmm. And you can ask them the questions that help them think about things. But it's not your job to change their minds. No matter how strange, weird they are. Because you might find out under all that strange and weirdness, you've got a lot more in common than you think. Because we're pretty certain that certainty, not a good thing.
Thanks for watching.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.